right. It's time for us to begin this morning. I've been on the go for 2 weeks, so it has been a busy couple weeks for me. Thank Braden. I don't see him this morning yet, but I thank Braden for covering last week's class. I did make a chance to go back and listen to it, and he did a really great job. So I picked the right guy for the job. But again, thank you to Braden, wherever he is at. Before we get going this morning, I've asked Hunter if he would say a quick prayer for us. So Hunter, would you do that, please?
Yes, sir. Let's pray. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we humble ourselves before you in prayer, thanking you for this wonderful day that you've given us to worship and listen to Bible class. Please be with Cody Chesser and help the material that he has prepared for us be readily available, and that we may all listen to what he has to say, and help us apply what we can learn from this lesson and apply it each and every day in our lives. As we go throughout this service, dear God, help us to do everything pleasing and according to your word. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, that I offer this prayer. Amen.
All right. So this morning we are on lesson 5. We're talking about the parable of the talents this morning first. This is another parable that we're probably very familiar with. It's one that I think we talk about quite a bit. Which is not a bad thing. It's a very useful parable for us. It reminds us of some very good things. It's in Matthew chapter 25, so if you want to turn there, we're going to read that in just a second. But before we do, question number 1 that we've asked for all of the parables so far. What is the background of this parable? What has Jesus been discussing before this? If we look back in Matthew chapter 24. Destruction of the temple, exactly, yeah. So Jesus, at the very beginning of Matthew chapter 24, is talking about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and that coming destruction, and being ready for that, and how no one knew when it would be coming, but it would be coming soon. And in Matthew chapter 24, like I said, that's where Jesus starts. And as that chapter moves on, and we get to chapter 25, and then especially as chapter 25 progresses forward, there seems to be a focus shift. We kind of move thoughts from the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem all the way to the end of days. The final judgment is kind of where Jesus has been moving the focus towards. And that is true definitely as we get to the parable of the talents. It's in that context, being prepared for final judgment. There are some parables even before the parable of the talents that are about that same idea, and in my scheduling I should have put those before this parable, but I failed to do that. So we're going to come back to those parables at a later week. So we'll save that discussion. But at least for preparing our minds for this parable, that's the discussion taking place, is being prepared for the return of the Lord, being prepared for coming judgment. And in this chapter, we're moving our focus towards the final judgment at the end of days. So let's go ahead and read the parable of the talents in that context in Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 14. If you'll read it with me. For it is just like a man about to go on a journey, for who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability, and he went on his journey. Immediately the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who had received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Also, the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one also who had received the 1 talent came up and said, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed, and I was afraid. And I went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours.' But the master answered and said to him, 'You wicked, lazy slave. You knew that I reap where I sow, and where I did not sow, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore, take away the talent from him, and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. And from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" So as we start to define the images and the things that are in this parable, let's go ahead and do that. Who is the businessman or the master in this parable? JD?
As a whole, either that being God the Father or God the Son, as in Jesus, who's telling this parable. The master in this context is God.
Exactly, yeah. I would say the same thing. It is God. And kind of like you said, some people will say God the Father, some people will say God as in Jesus. And I think that there is an argument for both of those. The argument for Jesus typically looks at the master entrusting servants with his work in the same manner that Jesus entrusts work to his disciples following his departure. And I think that there is absolutely merit to that. But I think given the context of this parable being about judgment and looking towards that judgment, I personally think God the Father would be a better fit for this parable, even though Jesus is the one saying it. But I wouldn't split hairs on that point at all. Because I think the fact that we're looking at final judgment and we're looking at being judged for the work being done is really the primary point. But either way, I'll allude to God, the master as God this morning. Who is represented by the 3 servants? Kyle?
Just broadly speaking of disciples or those who are entrusted with something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's men who follow Christ. It's Christians. It's us, right? It's the people Jesus was speaking to in that day who he hoped would follow him. And now for us, as we read it, we are these servants, right? We are the ones following Christ. We are the ones who are being entrusted with work from the master. God is entrusting us with the work of his kingdom. I am a servant. You are a servant. Stephen is a servant. Ben is a servant. Everyone in this room is one of these servants, if we're following what this parable is talking about. God is entrusting each one of us with these talents, as the parable states. So that leads us to the question, what is a talent? And let's think for just a second about the earthly part of the parable. Any ideas? Stephen?
Well, it's a weight of measure, and so it was the heaviest of those measures used by the Hebrew system, and supposedly it was 3,000 shekels, and a shekel is like 11.4 grams, so a talent would be about 75 pounds of whatever that substance was. I thought it was interesting that one of the dictionaries said it was the amount that a man could carry. That's kind of the most that a man could just consistently carry if he had to carry weight.
That's interesting. Yeah, you pretty much just read my notes, so good job. It's a unit of measure, just like Stephen said. He's exactly right. On the same brainwave this morning. It's a unit of measure typically used to measure an amount of money, like Stephen said. A talent was one of the largest denominations, if I can use a word we're familiar with, that they would have used at this time. Determining the exact dollar value of a talent is challenging. if you read enough commentaries, you'll read anything from $20,000 in today's money to a couple $1 million. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know. And I think the challenge there is, like we said, it's a unit of measure, unit of weight measurement, right? So if you think about that, measuring 75 pounds of gold is going to have a different value than 75 pounds of silver, right? So that's where that application makes the dollar value a little bit difficult to determine. But I don't think the dollar value really makes that much difference. I think really the idea is that we're looking at a large sum of money. Okay, that's really the takeaway here. Like I said, a talent was the largest denomination used. So in equivalent terms for today, what's the largest denomination of U.S. dollar that's currently in circulation? Anybody? $100 bill, right. That's the largest thing currently in circulation. That has not always been true. At one point in time, they were printing, I believe it was $100,000 bills, primarily for the use of banks or financial institutions being able to trade large sums of money easier. You probably would not have come across a $100,000 bill. I definitely wouldn't have either. But either way, that's kind of the idea. We're thinking about these large denominations. That's what this talent was. It's a large sum of money being given to these men. And I say that it's a large sum of money because we often look at this parable and we see the 5-talent man, the 2-talent man, and then we go, oh, the 1-talent man, he didn't get that much. Yeah, right? He wasn't trustworthy. The master didn't really have a lot of confidence in him, so he didn't give him much money. And that's not the case, right? 1 talent was a lot of money for these people. So even the 1-talent man was given quite a large sum of money that he was expected to do something with. So that's what the talent was. And I will point this out as well. We'll talk about this more in a few minutes, but I'll point it out quickly now. It's very easy to get caught up here by the word talent. Okay, Again, the Bible was not written in English, so the word talent here in this context is not our English word talent that we're used to, being skills and abilities, right? I think it's a complete coincidence that it ended up being our English word talent through means of translation. In fact, I thought about teaching this parable from Luke's account because he doesn't use the word talent. He uses the word mina or minas, which is also another, very similar to talent, another measure of weight used for money in the same context. And Luke makes the same points really with maybe a few different details, but we're not going to look at Luke's account. Again, just getting to this idea of a large sum of money. That's what a talent was. So for a few minutes, try to shift your mind away from our English word, although that will still be applicable in a few minutes. So like I said, before we really get to the meaning of talent as far as the spiritual teaching, let's talk about what each man did with the money. And the money itself. I mentioned this a minute ago, I believe. On what basis does the master bestow his goods upon each servant? Stu? Yes, based on their ability, not their need. So there is where skill and ability will come into it. According to each one's ability, according to each one's potential, what they were capable of doing by their own skill, and they were judged based on what they would do with it. So, what did they do with it? Right? So we have man number 1 was given 5 talents. Man 2 was given 2 talents. And then we have our 1-talent man. What did each man do with their money? JD.
Okay, so man 1, the one given the 5 talents, according to the text, he went out and traded in my account, New King James Version. What I interpret that to mean, what I guess is obvious, is that he went and used the money that was given to him, and in doing so, he was able to gain 5 more talents on top of those talents that he was given. And man number 2 did the same thing, but man number 1, on the other hand, and when I first read this parable, I generally thought he was doing the smart thing of saving his master's money, fearing potentially losing it and being perhaps in a very serious trouble for being in that debt to his master. So he decides to hide it, but instead dead. But it turns out that was actually the bad call, and that if he wanted to do the quote-unquote safe thing and keep his master's money safe, according to his master, he should have taken it to the bank, which is logical. But yeah, 2 out of 3 used the talents they were given and gained more talents, whereas the other one, the final man, did absolutely nothing, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. So JD just summarized all of that for us. Man number 1 doubled his money, right? He brought back 10. Man number 2 also doubled his money. Man number 3 did not double his money. In fact, he made nothing. He did nothing, and he brought back exactly what was given. And from this, we can see that the first 2 men, based on what they did, were praised by the master. So that would be question number 7 in our book, was how is it that both servants, the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man, were both equally considered faithful if they brought back different amounts of money? Any thoughts? Steve?
It wasn't in the yield that was returned to them. It was in the work that they did and how they used it, what opportunities they took, what effort they did, and it resulted in positive growth. But it wasn't the amount; it was the effort.
Yeah. Do you have something else? No, it's kind of the same thing. Yeah, each one were considered faithful, both because they applied the same amount of effort. Right, that's kind of what Stu was getting to, is the final number, the count that they brought back was not what was important. It was how much work they put in and the effort that they put into it. Kyle?
Well, and also, I think it's important to note that it wasn't just that they did something, but what they did was in accordance with their master's will. It's what they were authorized to do with what they were given stewardship over.
Yes, it was exactly what the master wanted them to do. Yes, that's a great point. They brought something back. They made return on the money. They did the business that their master had trusted them to do. The measure of their success was not the number, but the effort and the work that went into bringing back that number. And both men, we know, were equally faithful because they were given the exact same phrase in regards to the praise to them. The statements are identical, at least in my translation. It says that his master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of the master." Exact same phrase. They were both treated the exact same way based on the work that they did, even though at the beginning they were judged as having different skills and abilities and therefore given different amounts of money. But that was not what was important. It was what they did with it, which leads us to the question 8, why was the 1-talent man condemned? I think we all know it. What was it? He didn't even try, right? He didn't do anything, right? He was condemned for doing nothing. He was told he was being lazy. He just sat on his money and waited for the master to come back. He put in no effort at all. Like JD kind of alluded to, maybe in his head he thought, I'm doing a smart thing. I'm going to sit on this and not waste this money. But the master says, no, that was not what I wanted you to do. That was lazy. You should have done something. So here again, the important point that we made on the last question. He was not condemned because he had fewer skills or abilities than the others. He was not condemned for bringing back only 1 talent, as in less than the others. It was the fact that he brought back exactly what he was given, unchanged, putting no effort into making anything of it. Because look, let's think about this, right? Let me give you a hypothetical situation. Let's flip it. Let's say that 1-talent man actually put in the work and doubled his money, right? He brought back 2 talents. The 2-talent guy still did the same thing. He doubled it, brought back 4. Let's say the 5-talent man had decided to do nothing. And he came back to his master and said, look, I brought all 5 talents back to you untouched. Who would have been condemned in this scenario? The man who did nothing, right? The reason they were condemned had nothing to do with the money. Even in this situation, the 5-talent man brought back more money than the others. But I think the reasoning why the condemnation is given would make it clear that in this scenario, I believe the 5-talent man would also be condemned for doing nothing. The value was not the important part, right? They were not judged on the quantity of their return, but the quality of their effort. All right, that's the takeaway. And the 1 talent man put in no effort. He instead just made excuses. So we've defined this parable up to this point as us doing, or disciples in general, us would be included, doing the work of the master in the kingdom of God. So now let's look a little bit more closely at the talent and define them. As we look at the spiritual teaching, right, and we determine what this means and what this is talking about, what are the talents that God has given to us as we start making application? JD?
I mean, again, going away from how we define talents in English as like skills and abilities, things that make us unique, like athletic ability or intellectual ability, but in terms of like a master giving his servant like a sum of money to watch over, I interpret the talent that God has given to us in this context basically as either our souls or our lives, like our very existence, to do something with, be it for good or ill, since we have our own free will, but he has given us, the time of our lifespan to either choose to follow him and increase the abundance of his flock in this case, or to just, waste that time, really. But he has given it to us in the hopes that we would do at least something with it. Whether it's the right or wrong thing, just putting in some effort and being rewarded or punished accordingly, rather than just doing nothing.
And I think what you're saying, is generally an application for the parable, right? That the parable is about our lives, right? And what we do with it. That is ultimately the parable itself and the meaning. But as we focus in specifically to what we're looking at in regards to talents, you're not far off, I'll say that. But are any other thoughts, Stephen?
I'm thinking since it's in varying degrees, that it's likely not just my very life, but it's all the provisions that God has granted me in this life, whether it be physical things, the spiritual blessings I can share, the abilities to share the gospel, just whatever those abilities may be that are in this life for me to use for God's kingdom. That's likely what he's talking about here. I also find it interesting that, even those were distributed, that the ones that had more talent or talents given to them would maybe have to employ others to help them in their efforts. If you can't carry 5 talents on your own, you got to get a mule or people to help you load things and move things about. And so it might take even different kinds of talents, to lead or help or guide in getting that work accomplished too.
Yeah, it's a great thought. Anything else from anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm looking at this maybe a little different. I'm looking at this as a mom given 3 talents. And it's how I get those and the work I get to get those 3 talents, my 3 boys, to heaven. It's kind of how I'm looking at this as my talents. What can I carry? The weight, 3 young souls to help mature and put them on the right path.
Okay. That's a good thought as well. I'll tell you, when I tried to figure out how to explain this and how to teach this, it gave me a lot of trouble because of, like I said earlier, our English word talent, right, and the confusion that can be. So for a few minutes, I'm going to try not to use the word talent. I'm going to talk about amounts of money, okay, if I'm following the illustration of the parable. That's just where my head is as I try to think through these and reason through these myself. I think all of the things that you said were great, and I think we're all shifting our minds to that application, because I think a lot of times, like I said, it's easy to see the word talent and immediately start thinking about our skills and abilities, right, and making application from it.
So
Okay.
I looked it up in my dictionary app, and
Yep.
it says our English word is being derived from this parable that they pulled it out into Latin to come to mean abilities, because that's how your abilities is how you gain money. So
Well, and that may very well be true, that we derive our English word talent from that word. However, if you think about it from the perspective of the people listening at this time in history, listening to Jesus, they would not hear skills and abilities in that word talent, or in the word mina, especially if we shift over to Luke's account. They would hear money, right? And now, look, listen, I'm getting there in just a second. I'm not throwing skills and abilities out the window, okay? We're getting to that point. But however, if we're thinking about what Jesus is saying, he's talking about money. Because think about this, okay? I know I might be going a little bit of a different thought train than you, but let me try to land the train back to the ground. If you look at the parable and look at what's happening, these men were given different amounts of money based on their skill and ability. Right, so that's the differentiation between skill and ability. A talent or a mina, the amount of money, was something that when placed in front of someone who had the skill and ability to do something with it, could make something of it and turn it into something better and do something with it. The amount of money, the talent in this parable are things that God puts in front of us that we can use our skills and abilities to capitalize on. So where my mind goes when I read this parable is I think of the word opportunities, right? And I think Stephen and a few others were kind of alluding to that same idea. It's the things that God puts in front of me, right? And those can look like a lot of different things that I can use my skills and abilities on to do something with for the good of the kingdom. Now, like I said, are skills and abilities relevant to the conversation? Absolutely, right? The men were given different amounts of money based on their skills and abilities. So like I said, I'm not throwing skills and abilities out the window. It's absolutely applicable. But they were given the amount based on their skills and abilities. Remember, the one-talent man was not punished because he had less skill. Right? The skill was not what he had less of and was in trouble for it. It was the talent. It was the money that he did not do anything with. It's that opportunity that was put in front of him that he chose to do nothing with. Right? And that's why the other two were praised. They were given maybe even more opportunity because of their skills and abilities, but they did something with that opportunity. They made something of it. They capitalized on it because God asked them to do that. You know, I think about people here, and especially as I look around, there's many people in this room who have lots of talents, our English word, right? Skills and abilities, right? Lots of people in this room have many skills, many abilities to do things like leading singing, teaching Bible classes of all ages, people with skills that allow them to maintain this building that we worship in. And I think because you have those skills, you will find opportunities to use them for God. But also, I don't want to limit our thinking there either, because the work that we do for the kingdom, the work that we do for the Master, extends far beyond the walls of this building. There are likely many opportunities out in the world that God presents to us on a daily basis that we need to capitalize on and do something with, right? Those can be things like shining our light to other men, stepping up and defending the gospel when it's challenged, inviting other people to church or to Bible studies. These are opportunities to do good in the kingdom where we can apply our skills and abilities if we see those opportunities and take them. And I think tackling those opportunities is the point of the parable. Two men chose to tackle the opportunity put in front of them. One did not. We don't want to be the one-talent man who does not tackle opportunities. And that's really the point Jesus is getting to. Your situations might be different. Based on your skill and ability, you might get different opportunities. You might see different opportunities. Each one of you might see them a little bit differently. Each one of you might take a different approach. There was not one set approach that these men were given, at least not in the context that we read. The point was capitalize on the opportunities and do something with it. Thoughts?
I was just going to say that one of the things I've heard a lot about this parable was the Lord God recognized their abilities.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah, Stephen.
I also find it interesting that when that one talent was taken away from man 3, it was given to man 1. So it wasn't as if, well, he obviously the master thought, well, you can do more. He must have learned something, or he developed some skill, developed some other ability that he could handle more in the mind of the master. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
That was going to be one of my questions. So, how might that apply to us then? If we're making application of the parable, and then I guess the second question: would it be too far off base just to view this parable just dealing with how we handle finances or how we handle money? It is with money, but that was another question. What does that look like for us?
Yeah, so I'll handle that question a couple of ways. I'll answer your second question, and then I'll ignore your first question for a few minutes. The second question, talking about can we handle this in a view of handling our finances? Can we look at it that way? And I would say absolutely, right? What are the different ways that we can do good work for the kingdom? Well, definitely there are financial things we can do for the kingdom, and how we handle our money in regards to our responsibility to the Lord would absolutely be a way to look at it, right? It'd be hard for me to stand here and tell you, here's every type of opportunity you could take as a Christian, right, to do good for the kingdom, because that can come in lots of different ways. So I'll say yes, plus lots of other things, and then I'll get to your first question in a minute on a little bit more application. But before I move on to that next part, any more thoughts? Back there, sorry.
I've always thought of this as kind of similar to your opportunity resources, right? They were given resources, and they were charged with getting a beneficial outcome from the resources that they were given, right? And resources could be a lot of different things. That could be money, that could be time, that could be abilities, that could be children. Like there's a lot of different ways to think about resources, and our charge, that beneficial outcome that the master's looking for.
Exactly, Stu.
Added that in my notes.
Okay, cool. Adam stole it. Lori?
I like that in the Luke version of the story, there's an extra verse there that helps give a little context to you. Because chapter 19, verse 11, it says, "And while they were listening to these saints, he went on to tell the parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they supposed the kingdom of God was to appear immediately." So, and that's right before he goes into what he gave everybody. So the point is too, right? They didn't know how long he was going to go on a journey. They didn't know when he was going to come back. So what are you going to do in the time you're going to be gone? So it's easy to be like, well, for context for today, I've got 2 children about to go to college. Well, I can give more later to the Lord financially, right? I don't know when he's coming back, or at what point in your life are you not using your abilities? I could do that later. So it's all in context of time, right? Because they didn't know when he was coming back, and they thought, his disciples thought he was about to come back immediately.
Exactly, and that's a great point, because Luke definitely makes that point very explicitly, that they did not know when the master would come back and that they needed to take that into account. If we look at Matthew's account, and again, my scheduling prevented us from looking at this in the correct order, right before this parable, there was a parable about the 10 virgins, and that idea is expressed in that parable, that you don't know when the master is coming back. You need to be ready for that time, and then obviously that would be implied in this parable as well. Stephen?
To Ben's question about whether it could just be pertaining to money, I think if you look back at Luke 16, it's another story, but Jesus makes a point to his disciples. He says, "Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust but your riches?" So even if it is just about money, you can make that application. Say, well, there's something much greater that we're called on to be responsible for, which is handling of the spiritual work that we have to do and be productive in the kingdom. But it does reflect on our abilities if we can't even handle the meagerly things, physical things of this life, in a responsible way.
Exactly. I'm going to move forward a little bit. I know there's a few more hands, but I want to make sure we get to what I want to get to this morning. The next question that I apparently didn't put on my slides to kind of get to where Ben was going earlier about maybe a little bit further application. I think Jesus starts to make that point and to continue the application as he moves forward, and he talks to the one-talent man, and the one-talent man talks to him about why he chose to do nothing, right, and his reasoning. Question 9 in your books was, what is the description of the one-talent man gives of the master, and is it accurate? And this gets to the reasoning in the one-talent man's head. JD?
All right, so in the text, he describes, the servant in question describes his master as one who reaps what he has not sown and gathers where he has not scattered seed. And I think this is entirely accurate because the master, well, would have his servants be doing that essentially in this time frame, if I'm understanding it correctly. So I do believe the description is accurate, and as to the reasoning, which I probably stated earlier when I was talking about all three in context, how he said he didn't want to get into potentially in trouble by losing his master's talent, so his reasoning was just to preserve what his master had given him, to keep it safe until he returned.
Yeah, he uses this phrase speaking to his master. I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed, and I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground, and see, now you still have what was yours. If I can paraphrase what I think he's saying there is, Master, I knew you were a harsh judge. I knew you had very high expectations. And because I feared messing up and not meeting them, I didn't do anything. Right? I was so scared to fail that I chose to do nothing instead. And by the master's response, you can clearly tell that was not acceptable, right? You wicked, lazy slave is what he was called. The master says to him, you could have at least put my money in the bank and earned interest, right? That would have been easy to do. It doesn't take any effort to do that, or at least very little effort, right? What the master is saying back to him is, not only did you not put in the hard work to make significant gain on my money, you didn't even take the easy path. You're that lazy. There was an easy option that you could have picked at the bare minimum, but instead you did nothing, and that is why you are being cast out. At least do the easy part, right? Find something easy to do if you fear the harder and more harsh judgment and expectations. This guy seemed to be so deluded, this one-talent man, that he thought, well, I can't be successful, so if I don't do anything, you can't say I failed, right? And that was absolutely not true. Doing nothing was the same thing in the master's mind. Thoughts?
One of, again, going back to the application, just all the thoughts that's been going around, like, thinking specifically of, like, if you are afraid to speak out for the gospel of Christ. So when you mentioned about the easy route, doing something instead of, like, I'm not going to say something because I don't want to mess up or tell somebody the wrong news or whatever. I can invite, I can bring, I can connect, I can join in a Bible study, you know. So I am not taking the lazy way or the fearful way, but I am going to try and do something.
Exactly. That's exactly where my mind goes with this situation, is that it's very easy for us to be judgmental of the one-talent man, right? That, man, this guy didn't do anything. What's his problem? It would have been so easy for me to do something. Well, is it not possible that sometimes we're this one-talent man, right? Have you ever let an opportunity pass you by that you could have taken advantage of, right? And maybe you think back later, why didn't I say something? Or why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I help that person? Why didn't I fill in the blank? Right? I missed my chance. I missed my opportunity to do something. An opportunity was given to me because I was so afraid that it might be uncomfortable, or I was so afraid that I might fail, or I might not make change in that person's life. I chose to do nothing instead. I ignored the opportunity handed to me, even though it was put in front of me. I did nothing. I didn't even take the easy route. You have a comment?
I was thinking too, Cody, we get those missed opportunities many times at work as well, and because of all the laws and just so many different things, we have to be so conscious of what we say to people and all of that, but then we can still build those relationships and get to that comfort level where we can take advantage now of the opportunities. So, for instance, when I meet with people that I'm over, just in talking and listening to them, and they probably will share something with me, I open up to them and tell them, well, this is how I handle stress, or this is how, and I always tell them, my Bible is sitting on my desk, and they can see it. And they just ask, and we talk about different things, and I say, can I just share a verse with you? And I just send it via email. We don't have to discuss it until you have the opportunity, but it's not being afraid anymore, because I think too many times we think that we're going to get punished for talking about God, and that's not necessarily the case. It's my thing is I'd rather take the opportunity and get told don't do it rather than not try.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can capitalize on these opportunities. Like you said, Jesus says at least do something easy, right? If you're scared to do something difficult, you don't want to be the one to study with that person, at least give them a West Main card or a Texas Bible Study card. You don't feel comfortable or you don't know how to comfort somebody going through something difficult, at least point them to the Bible as a source of comfort. You don't know how to help somebody in need, at least offer to pray for them. You don't know how to answer a Bible question, at least introduce them to Ben. Right? You're afraid you're going to get in trouble at work. So at least leave your Bible sitting on your desk. Give people a chance. Give yourself the opportunity to open a door to something with those people. Do at least the bare minimum, right, is what Jesus' point was. Stephen?
I think to your question number 9 you're trying to get to, I think the distinguishing feature here is this man, the third man, described him as hard. Now, the master described himself as someone who did reap where he didn't, but he didn't say he was hard. So his expectations are reasonable, and it was this man's fear that motivated him to think, well, he's too hard of a man. Actually, Jesus is the most merciful, gracious master we could ever have. He's not expecting anything more than what we have the ability to do. So he gave him what he could do even in that.
Yeah, and that gets to the second part of that question was the statement that this one talent man made about the master accurate? And I don't think so. I don't think that it was accurate. The master doesn't really address that point. But like Stephen said, he just kind of goes with it. But this servant says, "You are such a harsh judge. Your expectations are so high that I was so afraid." And the master says, "Well, look, if you really thought that, if you really knew that my expectations were high, shouldn't you have done something? You realize that I had expectations of you." The master's not saying, look, I am harsh, I am mean, I am expecting more of other people and not myself. He's not saying those things. He's saying, if you truly thought that, you would have done something. No, this is just an excuse you're giving me now, right? And it's not going to fly. So Jesus has addressed a lot of problems in this parable. So fitting this into the context of judgment that Jesus has been talking about, those skills and abilities we have will open doors of opportunities to us, and we need to capitalize on those opportunities, seek those opportunities, and at the end of days, that's what we will be judged on. Not how many skills or abilities I have, not what I'm capable of, but what I actually did. Did I use my skills and abilities to actually accomplish something for the kingdom and benefit the kingdom in some sort of valuable way? Ben?
How do we balance this with the view that some Christians have of, almost working or, I feel like I have to keep doing more and more, with pertaining to my salvation. That to me seems like that could be an extreme that someone may get to, or danger that potentially somebody hearing about this opportunity. So, man, I missed another opportunity. How do we balance that? What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard. Cop-out answer, right? Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because I gave a lot of thought to that. Elena and I have talked a lot about that and as I prepared for this, is that same thought. And, you know, I think a lot of it, unfortunately, this may not be the answer you like, is going to come down to personal judgment, right? That each one of these men were given different amounts of opportunity based on their skill and ability. Each man had to determine for himself, what is the best way to handle this? How much do I need to do? How much is it appropriate for me to bring back to the master? What would be too little for me to bring back to the master? And each man kind of had to go about that themselves. But they also would have had, this wasn't the first day on the job, right? They would have had an understanding of their master's expectations and understanding of things that their master would approve of. And I think each one of them had to make that personal decision with what they were given to determine that. And that's kind of like I said, getting back to the personal decision, right? Each of these men were allowed to bring back different amounts, and that was acceptable. And so we've got to determine, what can I bring back? And
understanding the master even more, like what you were saying about the one talent man, he had a flawed view about the master.
Yeah.
So when we think about salvation and how we should be motivated by God's grace, that will help us as well with counterbalance and all of this.
You know, there is an expectation, though, that God wants us to mature. And so we don't want to set that aside, right? So as we have gained more resources, those may be resources that we've developed as far as how we can teach, you know, how we can serve others in the congregation better, serve other, you know, people. You know, we look at Hebrews 5, you know, we're supposed to, it's been so long, brethren, you should know how to teach now. You know, why are you still at the same point which you were 20 years ago? So there is that expectation, I think.
yeah, and that unfortunately is where the scope of this parable kind of ends. Is this is one situation. This is one trip the master took, right? And that's what we're looking at and using. But if you followed the idea of that parable, if we can extend it past what it means a little bit, the master probably would go on another trip at some point, right? And now the 5-talent man may be given all 10 talents next time to do something with. And next time you grow and you do more next time, if that time comes, right? And like we said earlier, we don't know how much time we have. We don't know how much time we'll have to work or what other opportunities might come in the future. I'll try to get a few more comments in.
For myself, if I leave myself as man 3, 1 talent, I don't think much of myself. I need to move past the 1 talent. I need to look at every opportunity and make sure I'm always doing or thinking like of what God would want me to do, so that I'm always taking advantage of the opportunities presented.
Yeah, because, you know, I think I said it earlier, but I don't know if I ever landed the point, was all 3 of these men were given large sums of money, right? There wasn't anybody who was, hey, you're a no-talent person, so just sit there and look good. Everybody was expected to do something. There was opportunity for everyone, and that's going to be the same here. Is there's no one in this room who can make the excuse that, like, I just am not capable of doing much, so I'm going to let other people do it, right? The master had expectations of every single person, right? Regardless of how many opportunities they had, how many skills and abilities they had, find something to do. Do the bare minimum. Put the money in the bank at least, right? Everybody can find something to do. Probably last comment, Kyle.
Well, you just brought to mind last week's study, the value God places upon each soul. That, you know, the people I have influence over in my life are very valuable to God. And I should not overlook how valuable this person is, whether I think highly of them or not. God values them greatly. If I can influence them for good, that's what I need to do.
Exactly. Any other final comment before class ends? Nope. So we'll end it there, and we'll pick up in the next lesson next week.